Welcome to the latest instalment of The Curious Capitalist. The Curious Capitalist is a series of podcasts where we take the opportunity to not only speak to board members from the Conscious Capitalism Connecticut chapter, but also local business owners, startups and entrepreneurs from across the state of Connecticut. On this edition of The Curious Capitalist, I'm joined by Lee Keylock. Lee is the Director of Global Programs at Narrative4. N4 is a global network of educators, students and artists that use art and storytelling to build empathy between young people while equipping them to improve their communities and the world. Lee is a Brit like myself, so forgive us. He is also a self-confessed Spurs fan. That's Tottenham Hotspur for anybody who didn't know. Lee, welcome to The Curious Capitalist.
Thank you, Claire. Happy to be here. And by the way, Spurs is playing in about an hour, so I'm glad that this podcast will be done by then, so I can watch the game.
Look, I understand, I sympathise. We'll get it wrapped up in an hour so you get the pre-match build-up, I promise.
Perfect.
Okie dokie. Tell me a little bit about how you got to this point in your career. How did you end up here? How did you end up hooked up to N4 and the work that you're doing there? How did you get to this point in your career?
Wow, that's an epic question to answer. I came to the US when I was 18. It was about 3 months before my 19th birthday. I was just bumming around. I was just backpacking around. I'd done a couple of years just going around Europe, backpacking, and then, sort of flipped a coin and came to the US. The US won over Australia. So I ended up here. Yeah.
Don't tell my father-in-law, who's an Aussie, by the way.
Don't, you can edit that part out. So honestly, no fixed agenda at the time. Just came here, was interested in traveling around the US, did a fair bit of that, ended up in New York. I lived in Queens, first of all, before moving into the city. And, it was only after doing a series of, various jobs, working in bars, worked in a nightclub for a few years, did various things, that I actually got into teaching. I went back to college. I never went to college in England. And at around 24, I suddenly thought, it might be good to learn some stuff. So I did. I went back to college and I got a teaching degree and I started teaching. My first teaching gig, anyone who knows me or anything about my story knows that I worked in Newtown in the high school for about 13 years as an English teacher. So I'm the real deal, Claire. English teacher.
Wow, an English teacher.
Yeah. And I loved it. I mean, to be honest, it was almost like when I started wanting to teach, I had no interest sort of going into schools. I mean, you probably remember the British school system. It's a Pink Floyd album, right? It's like just stand there, get lectured at. And I actually hated school. I left at 16. And when I came here, I just took a couple of classes at college just for giggles. And there was this one teacher that was amazing. This woman, Martha Lipson, her name was, and she taught this course on literature of the Vietnam War. And I just remember she brought all these characters into the class. They were like veterans of war, pro-war, anti-war people, like all of this. And I was like, wow, you're allowed to do that in class? And it just really turned me on to the idea of teaching with passion. And so that's what I did. And then of course, you fast forward a few years, you can't mention the word Newtown, right? Without, or Sandy Hook, which is where the high school is, without thinking about the murders in our town. So, and that was, almost, it's going to be 8 years in December since that happened. And really, to be honest, that was, there are moments in your life, right, that are a catalyst for change, for something. And I stuck around for another year or so after that, after the murders, and just thought more intentionally about how to create an impact and really foster empathy between people that didn't exist, so that you could perhaps reach people and connect with people before they commit a heinous act. I mean, this is all in hindsight, of course. At the time, we were just dealing with it, So I don't know. It was the catalyst for change. That's how I actually got involved with Narrative4, who was, at the time, they were just a sort of organization that was in the mind. I mean, they had done a little bit of work. It was really just two people at the time, Lisa Consiglio, who's the founder, and Colin McCann, who's an artist, right? He's an author. Mm-hmm. He was the co-founder, and I met Colin. I'd reached out to him after the slaughters in Sandy Hook, and I met him. I was interested in actually teaching his novel, which was called Let the Great World Spin. And I bought, I actually wrote to, I didn't even know who Colin was, but somebody had given me that book, and I just thought that book could help my students heal. I was teaching mostly sophomores and juniors at the time. And that particular book just, I don't know, it spoke to me. There was something about sort of hard fought hope in that book that didn't seem cliche. And I just felt like my kids, none of the regular curriculum would work anymore. There was a book that came out years ago called Readercide. I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's about how we destroy reading in schools for kids. And they're right. You know, so many of the texts are so damn tragic, and, you know, the kids can't connect with them sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're 100 years. And I'm not saying these Shakespearean texts and, you know, some of these iconic texts, The Great Gatsby, I'm not saying they're not great books. I love them. But at the same time, you're trying to reach a contemporary audience, right, of kids.
They're a bit heavy. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they're heavy, they're distant, and very, not to boil it down, but the canon of literature is very white too, right? It's sort of these white male heavy authors. And how do you teach some of those texts to kids of color if they don't see themselves in some of the characters? Anyway, so I wrote to Colin's publisher and just said, can I get some free books? And that's how the whole relationship started, because Colin wrote me a few days later and gave me the books, and I used them in class. And actually he came to Newtown to visit in April, which was about, you know, it was about 3 or 4 months after the Sandy Hook murders. So that's sort of how I met him. And then he told me about Narrative4, this idea, and I just thought it would be interesting to get my kids to share stories. So that's a really long-winded, I don't know, that's a bit long-winded.
No, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. And then obviously your work with N4, you're still working with Colin now.
Oh yeah.
And working on a variety of things. What do you wish that you'd known before you sort of started out on this career path?
I think, I don't know, there's so many things, but the thing that I find the most compelling is that the thing that's most important is you've got to learn how to listen to people and be open and be curious, and also be humble. They're the sort of the tenets that I've learned in the last few years. And I don't know how good, I don't think I was a good listener. I thought I was a good teacher. I mean, a lot of my kids, you know, still stay in touch with me from school and that, and they all say, oh, I loved your class, all of those things. And I tried to make it relevant to their lives. We had a lot of conversations in our class, but I still don't know how good I was at just listening and sitting with what I heard. You know, we have this compulsion as humans, I think, to try and fix stuff and,
absolutely,
you know, and help people and offer some sort of remedy or whatever, right? And that's the human compulsion, is to be kind and do that. But sometimes that's not what you need when you're trying to tell a story, and you just need an audience to be heard. Yeah. And I think that's the thing that I've learned in the last few years, be a better listener, and it takes practice, you know.
My mum always used to say to me, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, why don't you use them in that ratio? Which was always a good one. I hated hearing it as a kid. I'm not sure I ever really listened to it, but
yeah, I mean, yeah, she's right. She's absolutely right. We have to learn. I think Obama years ago, I remember him saying something about there being an empathy deficit, and one of the things was that we had to dethrone ourselves from the center of our worlds, right? And that's just, that phrase stuck out to me, and I kind of live by that. Like, just take yourself off your own pedestal and put somebody else there for a minute, you know?
Yeah, the world doesn't revolve around us. Absolutely. Yeah. It sounds like you've kind of ended up in the right role, in the right industry at the right time to be able to help those people as well. You know, I certainly know from my personal experience that I had an experience, if you like, when I was younger, where a teacher of mine was pivotal in changing my entire outlook on life. When I grew up in an environment where it was expected that I would get a job locally, whether that be in an office or in a supermarket, I would get married, I would have babies, and I would live and die in that same town. You know, that was the expectation in many ways. And very few ever had the foresight, I guess, to see that there was a big wide world out there. And that's what my teacher did for me. So I think when thinking about Sandy Hook and the terrible atrocity, having good, well-rounded educators around those children must have been very, very difficult on you, but what a great asset to the school and to the kids, for sure.
Yeah, and you can multiply that by many, because there are so many good teachers. There still are so many good teachers in that school system, and they're still struggling with it today. Yeah. We all are, and they're just, and I think honesty is really important to show yourself as vulnerable and real and hurting and broken, right? At the same time, alongside your kids is really important for them to see people in positions, or mentors or whatever you want to call them, like in positions of power, right? You want to see them as human as well. And I think Newtown staff, I got to give them a shout out. They're amazing. We were a collective group and we were healing ourselves at the same time. So we were muddling through it,
Absolutely. So. Thinking about Narrative4, what does it mean to you that your company has a higher purpose, if you like? Thinking about conscious capitalism, particularly obviously here in Connecticut chapter, businesses having a higher purpose and seeking to do some kind of greater good. Tell me a little bit how you see that fitting into the Narrative4 framework.
I think, I'm going to be brutally honest. I don't know. I know a little bit about conscious capitalism. I don't know massive amounts, but I think you need money to do good works. It can't just, otherwise it's all voluntary and it's running around and trying to do as many things with as few resources as you can. So I just think that you need resources, right? Human resources, fiduciary resources to do that. And I think you can be conscious around that. Like, how do you, for example, in our organization, we're sort of in that realm right now of how we're not really a startup anymore because we're 8 years old as a not-for-profit organization. We're sort of thinking about how do we scale up? How do we give more kids and more communities opportunities to share stories, share their truth, share their realities, and teach those skills, right? Of empathy, leadership, whatever that entails. And how do you do that without raising money and funds around it? How do you get into more schools and scale up? You need help. So I think that, first of all, I'm too old to work for anything or any place that I have no interest in that has some, notion of good outside of making a salary, right? There has to be some greater purpose. That's for me personally. And I think anybody that is drawn to Narrative4 share the same values, right? We are empathic people. We care about risk taking. We care about being perpetual students. We care about other people. We care about the nuance of people's stories. We don't just fit into a mold, and anyone who's drawn to us or works with us has the same passion for those things. And also you need incredible funding around that too, right? Funders that share sort of similar values. So I don't know if that answers your question fully, but I think you got to have a fingerprint, and our fingerprint is, look, we want people to empathize with one another. We want to build bridges, and we want to foster empathy to the point where somebody might get interested in another person or community and want to help and make change with that in a collaborative sense. And that to me is no greater worth than that, No,
absolutely. With your work at N4, how would you describe the culture of the organization at Narrative4? What words, what language would you use to describe it?
Well, I think passion is the first word that comes to mind. They're the most passionate bunch of people that I've ever met. We're only a staff of 9 full-time people right now. And we've had an incredible trajectory. And one of the things we've always said is it's not even about hiring well. It's actually people are drawn to our mission. And so the passion is already there. I always say you can't buy passion. You can't pay for that. That's just got to be there. So there's just an immense passion and openness and drive and a giving. There's no ego involved. So I think we've created a culture where it's sort of egoless, which is unusual in a culture, right?
Yep.
And, we have a lot of students work with us. We have a lot of authors. We have a lot of artists, like Colin McCann, right? Ishmael Bay. You got Sting. You have Terry Tempest Williams, who's an incredible environmentalist. Her work is phenomenal. And their voice, it's horizontal. Their voice is just as important or less so at times than the student voice, because we put students in positions of power. There's no tiers. There's just everyone has a voice, and we listen to all of those voices collectively. It's kind of utopian in the sense that our funders, the workers, the volunteers, we have so many amazing teachers, educators, and community workers around the world that do this because they just feel passionate about it. They don't even care about the money. The money is irrelevant,
If you could snap your fingers and make one cultural change happen, what would it be?
I just wish, I think one of the things that this pandemic has taught me, we were talking earlier before the podcast about, this sort of reevaluation, or we can hit restart on some of the values that were actually primary, right? The primary needs, which is family, community, safety, things like that in your home. And I just, as an organization, I wish we had more we're a small staff and we're global, so we're all over the place. And just the time to be together, like in a physical sense, I mean, like in the same space would be amazing. If I could snap my fingers and we could just be teleported to all be together for a day or two working, that would be amazing. Because I think the conversations that you have that aren't scripted around the water cooler or the pub, you know, if you go down the pub after work, it's those conversations is where a lot of the ingenuity and creativity happens. It's not
massively.
Yeah, it's not the 8-hour workday where that happens, you know.
You mentioned sort of the global nature of N4's work. Which countries are you in, and what would you say has been your greatest success whilst being with the company?
Well, we're in a bunch of countries. I mean, just to name a few, we're in South Africa, we're in the Middle East, we're in Ireland, we're in Mexico, you know, Colombia, you name it. There's a bunch, and on our website, you can check them out. And obviously, we're in loads of states across the US. So the global nature of it is just the one thing that just rings to me like a bell each time is that it doesn't matter where you are in the world or who you're talking to, we are much more similar than we are different. So all these narratives that try and divide people are just crazy to me, like, because most people just want good food, good laughter, you know, community, you know, and they just want to have fun, right? They're not worried about the other stuff all the time. So that's just world over. So that gives me a lot of hope. But my greatest, you're asking me what my own sort of greatest accomplishment is? Or?
Well, your greatest success, whether it be professionally or personally, or both. Let's be greedy. Let's have both.
Well, I think professionally, because I just think that the sort of meteoric rise we've had as an organization in seven and a half years is phenomenal. And that is because we are an organization that values story. Right? Your story matters, your life matters, your voice matters, your actions matter. And so many times they get corrupted by other things or people in power. And when you just bring people into a space and they get to tell their own personal story, their own truth, all of those stereotypes and preconceived notions come crashing down, right? So I think our greatest accomplishment is that we have expanded rapidly because there is this deep need, this primary need just to connect with other human beings and hear one another's stories. It's like it's a currency, right? It's the most democratic currency you can have. I think in that respect, when I left teaching, when I left Newtown, I had no safety net, right? I left and I was starting with an organization. It was just 3 of us, me, Lisa, and Colin. We went for it. I lost all my benefits. I lost all the stuff that, all of the stuff that you put into that creates safety, like retirement for school, for teachers. And there was a risk involved. So my greatest accomplishment is that Narrative4 is global, it's growing, it's being run by students, by educators, and it's just exponential growth. So that tells me that the right move was made, and there's a need for it. There's a need to foster empathy. But as far as me, I don't know, personally, I think I'm maybe a better person than I was 8-10 years ago. I don't know, just because I've met more people and heard more stories, and probably a better father. Maybe my wife might argue that I'm not a better husband, but I think I am. I think I'm more attuned to the human condition, which growing up in England, Claire, you can testify. We were told, shut up and don't be, seen and not heard. And we bottled everything up. And I'm just a more open person now.
Yeah. So. What's a feeling? What's an emotion? I don't think I still know how to label them.
It's funny. I'll tell you a quick story. My father came over. He still lives in England. He came over, and about 2-3 years ago, he did one of our story exchanges, right? And for those people that don't know, we bring people into a space. You have to tell a story from your life, and then to a partner that you've never met, and then you both come back into a space and you have to retell each other's story in the first person. So it's an incredibly visceral experience, and blah blah blah, right? So my dad went into another room and he's hardcore English, right? He's in he's almost 70 now, and on the way home, I said, well, Dad, how did that go? What was that like to do? And he's like, I don't know where you get all this from. And I'm like, what? Get what, Dad? And he's like, I don't know, this whole feeling thing, whole emotions thing. So he was rocked by it. But I knew what he was trying to say. I just think even my dad hasn't had an opportunity to just sit with somebody he doesn't know and tell his own story, right? Or some aspect of his own life. And that is transformative. So I think the fact that I get to do that on a weekly basis has made me a more open and better and more understanding person. But you might have to ask my wife and kids about that. They might have a different version.
I won't ask for evidence, don't worry.
All right, cool.
Thinking about, you say your average week. What does your average week look like pre-pandemic?
Yeah, pre-pandemic, or because right now it's about 10 hours a day in front of a computer. But
pre-pandemic.
No, it was, I would spend a couple of days working in one place, actually in New Haven. That's where I met Glenn, who's, conscious capitalism. And I met him working in a shared workspace, co-working sort of space. And 2 days a week, I'd be pretty stationary and I'd just be on the computer, sort of building programs and liaising with teachers. And then a couple of days a week, I'd be out training people to facilitate story exchanges, because it takes a little bit of some training to do that, to hold that sort of emotional space. You have to be a good facilitator. So I would train people, and then other times I'd be sort of flying all over the world to help bring it to communities and schools that really needed it. So I get to work in all sorts of places that I've never had the opportunity to visit before. And even zip codes next door, right? Think about New Haven or in Connecticut or wherever. You could have the same zip code, but it could be a vastly different sort of environment, right?
Goodness me, absolutely. Yeah, so very much so.
Just working in bunches of schools, I would go in and work with administrators, work with teams of people to train them up so that they could do the work.
It sounds like great fun to me. I've got to be honest, it sounds really good fun. So tell me, Lee, when you're not focused on your work, what do you do to relax? TV, sports, you name it. What floats your boat?
Definitely sports. I'm a big Tottenham fan, as you mentioned earlier. So the games. My
sympathies to you.
There's a lot of swear words, a lot of good British swear words that come out of my living room. People walking by, they might not like them, but that's real. The usual. I love hanging out with family, with friends. We try and a good beer. I'm a beer snob. When I first came in when I was 18, there was only like 5 beers, and none of them were what they would call artisanal beers, right? It was like Budweiser, and so I was a bit freaked out by that. Thank God there's a lot of breweries open now. So
loads.
I visit a few of those and listen to really good podcasts. I try to constantly stay up on contemporary issues that interest me. I really like Krista Tippett's On Being podcast. There's a lot of good ones out there right now. So, but yeah, that's it.
If you could have dinner with any figure in history, who would it be and why? And what questions might you ask?
Oof. Well, I just think there's 2 actually right now that come to mind. I haven't really, this is actually pretty unscripted, but one of them would be James Joyce, the Irish writer. Mm-hmm. And I know that sounds really pretentious, maybe to a lot of people. They're like, oh God, he's going to talk about Ulysses or whatever. And I'm not. I actually don't get that book. I've read it and I don't get it. And I'm like, it just makes me want to throw it at the wall. But what I do
English teacher, I love it.
Yeah, I know. There's an English teacher who just wants to rip a book to pieces. I just think when he wrote Dubliners and stuff, he was exiled. He sort of had to self-exile because he was considered a sort of traitor when he wrote Dubliners. And to me, it's actually a love song to a country that he thought was deeply paralyzed and in need of rebirth and help, and in whatever way he saw that. I don't want to bore you with all that, but he held a mirror up to a community or a country that he thought was broken. And he got, really chastised for that and sort of self-exiled, had to live in Paris. People hated him. And I don't think the Dubliners at the time, especially, but the country really appreciated him, what he was trying to do. I think to criticize a country like that, you have to be in love with the country too and see its potential. So he's one guy that I would like to sit and chat with and be like, yo, what was that like? Anyway, he's a complex guy. And I actually asked him about the current situation, right, in the US and the globe. Like, I would like to get his perspective on all this division that's happening right now and how he would tackle that. But the other person is more recent, actually. I listened to Ruby Sales. She's an African-American woman. She's probably in her 80s now, I'm guessing. And she was a sort of former civil rights leader. And I just listened to her On Being podcast with Krista Tippett, and it really shook me. It really moved me, her generosity in that and her life's work and what they were asking her about the contemporary moment and what's happening. And she just had this real openness, like, Obama was essential, but also Trump is essential, and she just brought it into light, like that these are essential people that are bringing these conversations to light now. And we need to have these tough conversations. And there was just something so beautiful in her rhetoric. And one of the questions that changed her life was when she was a kid, she just remembered asking somebody, where does it hurt? Right? That was a simple question. Where does it hurt? And she said she got this diatribe of her from this individual was telling her this whole story of her life. She said, and she just lives by that question, because that's what she wants to ask people. You have to get to the source of the pain, because people don't behave in ways that are just, I mean, maybe there's anomalies, but you don't just become that way. You don't just become a way, right? It's taught a lot of the time. And so, I don't know, those two people, Ruby Sales, James Joyce, love them.
Yeah, be a nice old dinner party. So tell me a little bit about your plans, both personally and professionally. What have you got on the horizon next 5-10 years? What have you got in mind?
Well, I mean, the next 5 years, hopefully we can get our program into every school. I mean, we have a new guy, Gotham, who's working for us. He's a new COO. And he's like, and we asked him that question. He's like, well, I just want to get in every school in the world.
Good boy.
Like, oh, okay, there you go.
Aim high.
So aim high. So I want to do that too. But, I mean, I'm a little more practical. Okay, with 9 people, we can do that. We can try. So, but that's what I want. That is my aspiration, because to me, stories are, there was a great artist I worked with in Minneapolis, Afra Mansour, her name is. She's, I believe she's a Somalian sort of immigrant. And after a story exchange, one of our story exchanges, she said that the distance between two people is a story. Mm-hmm. And that was it. And she's right. And that is why I think we need to have kids and teachers and peers and you name it, custodians, administrators. I don't care where you're from or what job you have. You should be sharing your stories with each other, because it's much harder to sort of dismiss an individual, right? When you hear their story, their personal story, you don't see them as a caricature anymore, or whatever, an ideology, whatever it is that we do, right? So I think story is really important to narrative, to get people to share them in school. So yeah, that's my aspiration next 5-10 years, get more people to share. And I don't know, my own personal ones, not have a heart attack while trying to do that. I don't know.
Aim high. Aim high.
Yeah, just stay alive long enough to see it happen.
You can't afford to get ill in this country, remember? So do not.
Right. So I don't know, that's my, and hopefully, just get people excited about the potential of everyone, right? We just fall into these singular narratives. They're too problematic for me. Like you have to get people, you have to collapse the distance between people in order for people to find similarities and community. That's what you got to do. And the more we can do that, the better shape the world will be in. And it ain't easy to do, because don't get me wrong, it's not like you can just throw people in a room. I'm not saying that. And you have to be very careful around, creating a safe and a brave space to do that. But I think if we can do it, then we can certainly get people to walk towards each other.
Absolutely. Look for the similarities and not the differences. How can people find out more about you, Narrative4? Is there a website, social media, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we're on all the platforms, Insta, Snapchat, you name it. We're on Facebook. I know that's for the older folks these days. But
don't say that. I know. Somebody said that to me the other day. It's too old-fashioned. I was like, oh my
please.
word, I'm getting
Kids
old.
Are like, what is that? They don't even know what it is. So we're on all that. So narrative4.com, right? That's our website. And, that has all our current offerings. And I would encourage people to go online. We have a live events page where people can join all these virtual events right now. Story exchanges to experience one yourself, see what the magic and the method is all about. And we're also launching what we're calling a Summit of Impact, which is going to be released in about a week. We're releasing our event schedule, and there's going to be a lot of headline events with artists, authors, students, and different events for different audiences. So keep an eye out for that. It's all pretty exciting. Sounds
like lots going on. I'm definitely going to check that out myself. So new website going live the week commencing the 8th. That's Narrative4, as in the number 4.com. Lee, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. I know you've got to go now because the foot is about to kick off.
Well, only 8 minutes away. Am I allowed to crack a beer? Yes, we're allowed 1 o'clock, right? That's about 6 o'clock in England, so I think we're good.
Exactly. I always go by the same rules. Time zones. God bless time zones. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet you. I sincerely hope that Spurs have a positive season next season.
Yeah, I hope so too. That's wishful thinking right there. Well, Claire, thanks. It was a great meeting you too, and it was lovely chatting with you, and thanks for chatting earlier as well.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the latest instalment of The Curious Capitalist. For more information, you can visit the website connecticut.consciouscapitalism.org.